Quarantine is weird.
What happens to a person when they're alone for a long time? We've all been alone a lot lately. I've been alone a lot lately, and for a long time I didn't really know what to do with myself. At first I felt hopeless,
angry, jealous.
It reminded me a lot of when I was younger, of last year, when I felt really alone. I didn't know what to do then, so I got into some hobbies. I started comparing myself to other successes and pains, and I started rating them. I didn't want to start doing that again. I had to stop doing that again. I was going to do something bad. I was going to if I didn't figure out what was wrong with me. What was I doing wrong? What had I done wrong? How am I wrong? Am I a bad person? Am I selfish? Is it narcissistic to think only about myself? I don't really know what I should do. So I ended up trying something new, and what that meant was I began to also rely on what was familiar with me. In May of earlier this year, I made a video trying to answer the question, were we right about Power Bottom? I was teased by my friends because the video wasn't very topical, which confused me because media doesn't expire. It doesn't go bad. It doesn't disappear. The emotions and experiences I have connected with media doesn't disappear either. It also frustrated me. It honestly kind of hurt. I expressly opened that video with the intent of gaining some sort of closure about the overnight disappearance of not just my favorite band, but a sense of disillusionment about the world at large. And quarantine has been weird. Like I said, when I experience something, it doesn't disappear for me, those feelings. Maybe it's because I'm sentimental, or maybe it's because I'm a triple Virgo. Whatever the reason, I'll feel a feeling and think, yeah, I remember feeling this way when I was 8 and listened to Sade, and then I'll listen to Smooth Operator for the first time in like 14 years. And this year, I've been returning to my old media a lot. Like everyone else, I've been feeling scared, and sometimes I've been feeling alone, and I've been feeling impassioned and enraged and inspired and stifled, and feelings of queer love that are too nuanced and sublime to even start talking about it. But it reminded me of when I was younger and not in the best headspace and was hiding in my room or sleeping on a soft piece of park grass at night or couch surfing with some alpha dom daddy. Just the sense of everything is happening too fast to really take in, and I really don't want life to pass me by, but it's really not slowing down. It's going faster, and I'm really not getting any younger. But I can't stop thinking about how the way that things were and the way that I wish things could be. And, I know if I exercise more and drink more water and breathe a little bit more mindfully, I'd be better at living in the moment. But it's just really hard to not be in your head all the time when you're alone all the time. And it made me feel so overwhelmed, and I was so overwhelmed with everything that I put on my plate, and then right when I thought that it was all about to become too much, I heard,
and I feel the pain quotidian, over and over and over again. I feel like a princess in a tower, counting down the minutes and the seconds and hours in. I feel like some art school hack, pissing on about this and that, and I feel like my heart is for hire, and I'm tired of being tired.
Wait, what? Quarantine has been so goddamn weird.
1, 2, 3, go!
I just think that you deserve to know that. So, if that's going to bother you, take care of yourselves and watch one of my other videos. Hello, I'm Barbie Wire, or Brooke, identity crisis and all that. And in this video, I'm going to make a case for Power Bottom, Ben Hopkins, and Liv Bruce, and that we were wrong. Deadass. I'm going to use the analytical frameworks of queer theorist technique to explore both the past and present situation of the band, as well as dipping my toes into some very minor music and media analysis. I'm making this video for fellow fans of Power Bottom / X fans and people who may have heard of them years ago. There's something about them that I just can't shake. Back in May, I made a video called Were We
Right
about Power Bottom, and I'm honestly not that proud of that video anymore. I spent a long time editing it and recording it, but I mean, the quality itself is pretty horrid, but the content, I think,
I didn't know what I was doing, basically.
shows that I was very early in video making, in content making. I think that I still am, but there are many things I would change about that video. Specifically, I think that it draws on too long in certain parts, and I think I still have a habit of doing that, but I'm trying to get better about it. And also, I don't think that I was particularly tactful in my conclusion. This time, I really want to take the time to provide the kind of gravity that I think that these kinds of conversations deserve. This video is not only about the band's Power Bottom or the person Ben Hopkins. It is also me posing a question. How do we know when we've done the right thing? And when we do the wrong thing, how do we fix it? My hope for you, by the end of this video, isn't for you to have the exact same opinion as I do. I just want to pose my case and the reasoning behind I hold the ideas that I do for Ben Hopkins and Power Bottom. And I hope that by providing my intuition, there can be a more nuanced and cautious approach to how we treat each other and hold discussion online, especially regarding queer individuals. Because, I'll argue about this later, the queer identity doesn't just make someone apt to internalize pain and critique, but also that this critique and pain can be in fact informed by transphobia and homophobia. Now, I never intended to make a follow-up video to my Power Bottom video. Actually, I framed that entire video by saying I'm doing this to receive closure. However, since then, several things have transpired. For example, Ben Hopkins has released an album called I Held My Breath for a Really Long Time Once, and has decided to return to the internet with some sort of present. I think that that album answered a lot of lingering questions that I held, especially ones that I posed in the video from May. But I don't simply want to rehash the thoughts from my previous video. I want there to be a clear distinction between this video as a persuasive video that is performing media analysis, and the previous one as a news analysis theory crafting the story of, like, headcanon type video. But before I can do a synopsis of my previous video, I should probably assume that not all of you know the story of Power Bottom's cancellation. Ugh, I feel so gross using the word canceling and cancellation now. I feel like a bit too, I don't know, Louis C.K. But I do also think that out of all those who've been canceled or deplatformed, Power Bottom were both the Prometheans of, as well as the only true examples to, being removed from a platform. So I'll try to limit my usage of the word canceling because I do find it a bit cringy, but bear back with me. If you want to skip the parts where I'm talking about who Power Bottom were, their story of being canceled, and the summation of my last video, please skip to this time frame. Alright, so, who were Power Bottom? Essentially, this person, Ben Hopkins, and this person, Liv Bruth, met each other at Bard College in the early 2010s. Very Steven Universe, very season 1, super cute. They were in a musical or play together or something, and at this point, both were pretty early on in their transgender journey.
Me throughout my whole transgender
The
journey.
whole message of my journey as
the
an
vulnerable
influencer.
moment of the
It's just
truth
been
of the
so
lived
impactful
experience of
on
my
my life
transgender
and the truth
influencer
of
journey.
it's just so meaningful that you guys have been here supporting
so much to me that you guys are
my
supporting the
transgender
truth of the
influencer
lived
journey.
experience.
And as far as I can tell, they sort of got into their whole trans vibes together. This reminds me of someone.
On the phone while he's in my hole, trying to find my heart over in my home. The dick is tiny and the dick is small. I'd rather use something or nothing at all. Refuse to fake it while I take it. Rough and dirty, not nice and funny.
Now, it was a match made in heaven. Ben was at home on the guitar, and Liv was at home on the drums. Both had experience with the other's instruments, and both were lyricists. Ben, who was obviously a little bit more rock inspired in their music, and Liv was always a little more poppy. Blood money. And after some performing around at their college and in New York, bam! Ugly Cherries.
All day and night, ugly cherries, bonafide.
They were signed by Father Daughters Records, honey. It was incredible, lovely. And then they toured, and they were iconic and sweet and funny, and a lot of people latched onto them. This was right before / right at the start of Steven Universe and Queer Eye's reboot, you know. So the main queer representation at the time for young folks was like Marceline and Princess Bubblegum's hinted at relationship, you know. They were important for a lot of young queer folk for just feeling, oh, there are people out here who I can relate to. They preached consent and loving yourself and how they want their shows to be safe spaces for their fans. Then beep boop bop, 2017 rolls around. It's May.
It's gonna be me.
And the Dark Ages begin. And Ben Hopkins, at the time lovingly called Bean, is accused of sexual assaults online right before the release of their sophomore album, Pageant. Okay, so in 500 words or less, the cancellation of Power Bottom. It was a 4-day shit show, and it left everyone with whiplash, lockjaw, and wobbly knees, girl. Ben was accused of sexual assaults from an individual known as Kitty Cordero Collin on a Facebook page. This is a whole paragraph in and of itself. Screenshots were posted. Everyone, except for Liv, said they had witnessed Ben's predatory behavior, and they were standing up for themselves and their community. You can't hurt people like this, Ben. That got spread on Twitter. A bunch of fans pulled out of Power Bottom's upcoming tour. This Billboard article was published. This statement was made by Lynn. This statement was made by Power Bottom. Pageant was removed from streaming services, and Ben and Liv were dropped from their mother-daughter records label and their new polyvinyl record. And then came silence. Then, 3 years later, this sissy decides to end the online silence regarding Power Bottom and make a retrospective. Like I said, I really don't want you to watch it because everything that matters in that video is going to be said in, you guessed it, 500 words or less. Basically, in that video, I was being very cautious in the way that I approached this conversation because I didn't want to be invalidating or making light of anyone's experience with trauma, assault, and violence. But now I'm a goddamn cockroach motherfucker, and I don't think anything like that happened. Let me explain. Essentially, I expressed concern about the evidence presented, which I think is fair when it comes to one of my favorite musicians' entire life, you know? And so at the time, I said, y'all should just read the Billboard article from 2017 because it summed up the general public's thoughts pretty well. Now, here are the screenshots. Ben called their drummer, Liv Bruce, by the way, a dumb dyke. Honey, it's 2020. I scream the word tranny as I drive by my best friend on campus, and we call each other crossies in private. Trans people can make jokes, okay? Yeah, there's a place to have a conversation about slur reclamation, but an NB queer person calling one of their besties a dyke in private, I'm gonna guess probably isn't adding to systematic oppression or violence against lesbians, or maybe it is. I don't know. I'm acephobic, don't talk to me. Then all the assault allegations were anonymous, and I don't think that's indicative of innocence, but I'm sure not saying it does much in the way of proving guilt. The cream of the crop is that Ben's dad was accused of making advances on women at Power Bottom concerts, and Ben was doing nothing about it. I would like to say that Ben Hopkins is not their dad and should not be held accountable for their dad. So these accusations mostly came from Kitty Cordero, and then were supported by like 3 or 4 people who were anonymous. A lot of people were like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. I would just like to say that none of these posts are from victims, all are just friends of the victims, and to quote ContraPoints, sometimes people can lie. They also are referencing Ben's father for being a perv, and like the show that they referenced it happening at is 3 hours away from Ben's family. They performed in Ben's hometown like 2 weeks prior, so why would Ben's father have been there? Now, language regarding sexuality is incredibly weak, and a shitty or unwanted advance, I think, is not assault. I also don't think that it's something that should go undiscussed, but in regards to dragging an entire person's livelihood and passion away from them, I don't think that it is conducive to the cultural lexicon and its growth and development to just say birds of a feather, you know? And having a shitty experience with someone flirting with you isn't assault. Persistent advancement is harassment, but assault isn't having someone flirt with you and you not wanting them to. So, the swastika that Ben drew was when they were like 13. And if people looked at the shit I was doing when I was 13, I would expect to be asked to be held accountable for it. And I would hope that the work on myself as a person would prevail and show that I am no longer a 13-year-old who grew up in the environment that I did. I really think that people can change. I also think that all 13-year-olds were shitty, but that's beside the point. So, one of the anonymous online individuals who said that Ben sexually assaulted them goes by the online moniker Jezebel in the article. I just want to bring up the really transphobic way in which they describe Ben and Liv when discussing them in the article. Jezebel described Ben as so much bigger than her, but first of all, I just want to say that Ben is, like, skinny, with, like, a 16 BMI. And I also want to talk about how Ben is obviously the, like, more masculine-presenting non-binary person of the duo. And I think that there's, like, some underlying birthy, transphobic bias happening because Ben tends to have facial hair and is tall. And I think that that relies on the same sort of notions as, like, these big, large men, which is pretty transphobic. But then I was like, Liv shouldn't be condemned too, because I wouldn't know how to react in that sort of situation. I really think that Liv would have done something or said something if she really did witness something that she believed to be something that violated someone's consent. And then, in the last video, I was like, all the ways Ben is being framed in these conversations are transphobic, and they place them in the same language as a man that assaults people instead of a twink turned gasoline drinker. It's the beard, isn't it? It's because Ben has arm hair and goes by their birth name instead of being called, like, Brick or something. You goddamn non-binary bitches. People also said that their online silence was an admission of guilt, and I was like, hello, they were dropped from their labels and probably weren't legally allowed to use the Power Bottom Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. And it was pretty clear to me that Ben and Liv were a test run from a bunch of nameless suits about the ability to capitalize on queer identity and art in the mainstream. Because they were deaf about, like, 2 days away from being the next big thing, and they were dropped so quickly. And that's about it. For several more months. And then, holy shit, Ben's alive.
I feel like a freedom fighter, choking on a pacifier. I feel like my mom and dad. I feel like I might be out of chances, and I feel so sick these days. I feel so scared
Part 4. Ben Hopkins, a bitch that they just can't keep down. So, obviously, with the return of Ben Hopkins came a Billboard article. Which is a terrible idea, because no one read it, because it's 2020, and reading the news is the equivalent of mental self-harm. But, I'm a woman. Yeah, I'm on estrogen, deal with it. So obviously no one read this Billboard article, because 2020's headlines have been quite massive. If you didn't know, hi, how are you? The return of some almost rock star really isn't going to be breaking headlines for the vast majority of people, even people who did care about Power Bottom. But I think that sucks because it answered a lot of questions and thoughts and concerns. So I would like to just preface my discussion of this article with discussing once again the language with how they described Ben Hopkins. They described Ben, the article, they described Ben as skinny. Which, when you compare this description of them in their previous article as towering, makes me want to puke. Transphobia reigns strong. So, alongside the release of their new solo album, Ben has also been recording a podcast called The Special Sauce Podcast, where Ben sits down with people and asks people about their creative endeavors and where they get their inspiration, which Ben coins their special sauce. Basically, the synopsis of the article is that Ben Hopkins has spent the last 3 years in isolation waiting for something to happen. And that when it all first happened, they felt blindsided and numb, and they said that the week following everything felt like a dream, and we can just say that they disassociated. Which makes sense. I feel like that's a lot. They also say that they no longer have the time or energy to give credence to the idea that they sexually assaulted someone, and then they delve into their personal relationship with the person that accused Ben of sexual assault. Which, by the way, what does ContraPoint say? Oh yeah, let's just delve deep into trans people's histories and drama.
Till I die.
So, I was going to do a more in-depth musical analysis of this album, but I think that would just be adding fluff and take away from the main point of what I'm trying to say. But I do think that's important to understand the context behind the songs on this album for me to move forward with the video. And also, I think they'll really explain why I give as much of a fuck I do about this topic. So let's just start from the beginning. The first song, Internet Song, is just the repetition of a G-flat chord. Usually in rock music, you will hear non-flat major chords, usually power chords. And in this album, it is littered with flats everywhere. Which I think, if we are a little symbolic, I think sort of represents Ben's feeling decompressed and exhausted, and like they've had the wind taken out of them, maybe how they've been depressed. But like this whole album is basically built upon flat majors. And first song is just G-flat. Lyrically, I think it's pretty clear what Ben is trying to convey. Somebody swallowed the sun, now the morning never comes. It feels like it's going nowhere. Feels stuck. This song feels stuck, and lyrically pretty clear. Ben's light and warmth has been sucked out of them, has been taken away. And in place of this hole, Ben has taken to wasting time on the internet. Or other people have placed the internet as more important than something like light and warmth. And Ben is just going to die because the internet has replaced light and warmth. Next comes the song Shame, which again has a lot of flats, but I think lyrically it's quite important because it really shows that Ben has obviously the song has multiple meanings, and I Still Love You All the Same raises questions of purposeful ambiguity, whether Ben is talking about, a certain person, like I love you all the same, or talking about like old Power Bottom fans, like I love you all. I think that's purposeful and it's meant to be multi-purpose. But importantly, what this song adds to the album and the experience is the confirmation that Ben is still the person that they were sort of perceived. Next is the song IDK, and this shows Ben's feelings of wandering and confusion and uncertainty about life. I relate to that. I think many people in 2020 relate to that, but as queer people, we don't really have the luxury of fitting into heteronormativity very, the heterolinear timeline, which is like birth, school, job, marriage, death. For the most part, queer people don't have the luxury of engaging. And I think that this speaks to a lot of that queer experience of uncertainty about one's future and place. Next is Apartment Song number 1, and I think that Apartment Song 1 is the first, I'd say, downbeat song on the album. It exists of mostly flat chords, like most of the other songs, but there's a F minor add ninth, which I think sounds quite tragic. Okay, the chord progression for Internet Song is just a G flat, so it goes flat. So that goes I don't know. You know what, maybe I won't do this. So lyrically, the content of Apartment Song number 1 shows how something that for many people Saturday morning is a time of relaxation, looking forward to the weekend, sleeping in. It's the first day in weekend and relax. And for Ben is a metronome. It is indicative of repetitive monotony in their life and how they are just using the scenery and how they are reflecting on their environments as it relates to their. Next is the song Bill Murray, also known as Gasoline, and it just shows that Ben has become an alcoholic, that alcoholism runs in Ben's family. That is the place that Ben has for comforting themselves, which is really sad and upsetting. Next is the song Sister, which is one of the songs that I feel as though really showcases the injustice of what happened to Ben in Power Bottom. So Sister shows Ben posing the question to the alleged sexual assault victim of how they are still open to talking to them and how they are hurt by them lying about Ben assaulting them, I feel. Running on Air, great song. Love that song. Dance, 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 Apartment Song 2. Laugh Track, okay. I want to get to the song Laugh Track because Laugh Track is I feel as though the emotional climax of the album. It is the song, it is like a 7.5 minute long song, but it shows essentially every single thought and experience that Ben has had for the last 3 years summed up in 1 7 minute. It is just E flat, A flat, D flat for the most part. Gosh, I can't even explain how important that song was to me and how much I love that song. And I feel the pain quotidian over and over and over again, and I feel like a princess in a tower, counting down the minutes and the seconds and hours, and I feel like some art school hack, pissing on about this and that. And then the album ends with the song January, Charlie Chaplin, which is, again, just the same chord, A flat, over and over again. And I think that sort of brings it sort of full circle. It starts with a song that is one chord over and over again, ends with a song that is one chord over. Now, it starts with D flat, ends with A flat. I think that it shows a feeling of movement, but not really getting anywhere. So, and lyrically, January really delves into the feeling of the optimist's last hope, which is if you are an optimist and you have lost all hope, the last hope you will cling on, you will grasp onto is the knowledge that one day all suffering is going to end. And that's like really tragic that is this person's final plea to hope. Okay, so why was that necessary? Why was a musical analysis of I Held My Breath for a Really Long Time Once necessary? Well, A, because I wanted to. But B, I thought it was important because for this next part coming up, application of queer theory as it applies to this album, and how it explores queer isolation, trans resilience, and the image of the celebrity. This may be a whole nother video in and of itself, and it may be a video that I surely do return to. However, I want to give at least a few minutes dedication to the way that I process media and the world when it lingers with me. So that's what I shall do. So, this author, Jasper Puar, wrote a book called Queer Times, Queer Assemblage, which basically explores non-heteronormative temporality, which basically means the way that you experience time, and queer assemblage, which is the way that we like group up and categorize. And really, so in this book, they use the image of the terrorist to discuss the Western world's obsession with categorization, which is essentially the idea of the terrorist was so scary to US Americans because their faces were covered and do like racism all look the same, and that this lack of ability to identify someone immediately upon look was a queer form of experiencing the world, and that this was dangerous because this bias of terrorism being associated with like Middle Eastern and Muslim people extended to non-terrorists and people who wore headscarves and facial coverings for religious purposes, brought about a lot of violence to Muslim individuals. And so this example of the Western obsession with categorization, bringing harm to other people, I think is applicable to the story of Power Bottom and Ben Hopkins. Immediately outside of everything that's happened to Ben and Liv, I think that there is a fear of queer musicians and queer artists to make it big because of the way that we have treated queer, like these queer figures in the past. I know that my band, we are certainly not planning on becoming big because we know that once we get past a certain point, the way that we are treated is out of our control online by the mass public. You know, it's not just gonna be our friends, and that's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. This example can be seen with Black Dresses. They are this duo that make post-industrial noise pop, aka my favorite band and my favorite genre. And they really blew up on TikTok and started receiving a lot of online notoriety. It terrified them. These two women are of the trans persuasion. They date each other. Izzy and Rook, Devi McMillan and Rook. We love them. And they decided to disband Black Dresses because of their anxiety with how they would be treated online if they continued to grow at the rate that they were. Which is fair. Which is super duper fair. I don't want to live in a world where queer art is suppressed because of policing queer individuals. But I think if we go into the idea of like trans resilience, Natalie Wynn brought up someone very lovely. But when we get into the idea of trans resilience, I think that there are as many examples of trans resilience as there are trans people. But I'm going to once again lean onto ideas presented by Sarah Zedig in her video about transitioning. Also, thank you, Sarah, for letting me use audio from your video. Trans people have to ask themselves really difficult questions that leads to the conclusion of being not cisgender, hence why they're trans. And I think that within this process, there is a lot of pain and a lot of doubt and a lot of shame regarding feelings that are out of one's control. And trans people, every single person who has come out as trans, gains some form of strength and power by coming out, that they are in control of their life story, which is a strength that I think is unique to non-cisgender people, because it's not just, the transition, it's the transitioning, it's the before you begin transition, it's the before you even ask yourself the question of building this strength. And trans resilience can be seen in a couple of examples, like the band I brought up earlier, Black Dresses. They may have disbanded, however, they're still making a lot of music, and whether that be through solo projects or through collaborating with other artists, they are still at work doing what they're passionate about, despite their anxiety. And I think that is a story of resilience that is specific to transness. Now, when it gets to the idea of celebritism, there is not a single public trans celebrity that is treated well, even by queer individuals. Laverne Cox, for example, is constantly being, broken down by the queer community. And I think that queer people have this really ugly habit of directing internalized shame and guilt and anxiety to other queer people of notoriety. And it makes me sad. It makes me really sad that the environments of queer spaces online, I think that the entire internet is a queer space. I think that queer and trans individuals should be allowed the same space to grow and fuck up as, cis het folk. And I really hope that's not a hot take. I know that's 2020, and that canceling is understood to be actually a failed project. And that is a failed... It consists of mostly failure for having people take accountability for themselves. So how do we go about repairing people's lives? I think that a major way that can happen is this call to action, which is Ben Hopkins and Liv Bruce should be given back the rights to the Power Bottom moniker, to the rights of Ugly Cherries and pageants, and I think that they should be allowed to be in control of their public image, which, they're obviously not. So, I suppose that's it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'm sorry that this may have been a bit of a ramble. It took me a long time to record because I have re-recorded and rewritten this script and everything half a dozen times. And I hope that you enjoyed. Please leave your thoughts down in the comments below. So share, subscribe. Go buy my band's new EP. It's out now. It's called Featuring Knock and 3 other fan favorites. My band's name is Bio Girl. I would also like to give a big thank you to Ben Hopkins and to Sarah Zedig. You're both huge inspirations for me. I hope you're both doing well. Thank you so much. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye!